The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that hums with tension. You could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the creak of old wooden benches, and somewhere near the back, the muffled sound of someone crying. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary sentencing hearing. It had been 8 long months since the night 19-year-old Emily Carter was found dead on the outskirts of her small Ohio town. A college sophomore, honor student, and local volunteer. The kind of girl everyone seemed to love. The man standing trial for her death, Daniel Reeves, wasn't some stranger or mass intruder. He was her ex-boyfriend. He'd sat quietly through the entire trial, head down, never speaking, never looking at anyone. But when the jury returned with a guilty verdict for second-degree murder, something about the way he exhaled made even the bailiff uneasy. Today was supposed to be his sentencing. The prosecutor had asked for life without parole. The defense begged for leniency, arguing the shooting had been an accident, not premeditated. But what no one knew, what not even Daniel knew, was that before she died, Emily Carter had written a letter that had never been entered into evidence. A letter that her parents had just received permission from the court to read aloud for the very first time. The judge's gavel echoed once. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The room filled with the sound people standing. A sea of faces, a mix of grief, anger, and exhaustion. Judge Mary Ann Holt, known for her composure, took her seat. Her tone was steady, but her eyes were tired. "Before we proceed with sentencing," she said, "the court will allow the victim's mother, Mrs. Carter, to read a written statement from her daughter." Every head turned as Linda Carter, Emily's mother, slowly approached the witness stand. She held a folded piece of paper in trembling hands, its edges worn and smudged, like something that had been held too many times to count. Daniel Reeves didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the table, his wrist chained, his lips pressed tightly together. Linda took a breath. And then, in a trembling voice, she began, "If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. But I don't want this letter to be about fear. I want it to be about truth." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Reporters' pens scratched frantically across their notepads. Linda continued, "Danny and I have had our problems. I know people think I should have walked away sooner. But I couldn't, because part of me still believes there's good in him. The same boy who used to sneak me flowers behind the gym, who'd talk about our future like it was already written. But if anything ever happens to me, I need you to know I wasn't planning to leave town that night. He asked me to meet him. He said he wanted to say sorry. He sounded sincere. I believed him." The words hung heavy in the air. Daniel shifted in his seat, his breathing shallow. "If he hurt me, then please tell him I forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because I refuse to carry hate into whatever comes next." A gasp came from somewhere near the front row. Even the judge's composure faltered. Linda's voice broke as she reached the final lines. "But if this letter finds its way to court, then maybe the truth will too. Don't let lies bury me twice." And with that, she stopped reading. Her hands fell to her sides. The courtroom was dead still. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time in the entire trial, Daniel looked up. His eyes met Linda's. And for a moment, something flickered there. Guilt? Grief? Recognition? Then, to everyone's shock, he whispered something. Just one word. Barely audible. "Sorry." Judge Holt leaned forward. "Mr. Reeves, did you say something?" Daniel hesitated. Then, with a voice that cracked under its own weight, he said, "That letter, she wasn't supposed to keep it. I told her to burn it." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters froze mid-scribble. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying this letter is authentic?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. She wrote it 2 days before that night." And then something changed. The defense attorney leaned toward his client, whispering urgently, but Daniel shook his head. He wanted to talk. For the first time, he wanted to tell his side. What came next would unravel everything. The timeline, the motive, even the identity of who truly pulled the trigger. And by the time he finished, the courtroom's understanding of the case and of Emily's death would be completely destroyed. Judge Holt leaned back in her chair, eyes locked on Daniel Reeves. You understand that anything you say now can and will be used against you? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I can't keep it anymore. The courtroom was frozen. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Fallon, exchanged a quick glance with the defense attorney. Fallon's expression was a mix of satisfaction and suspicion. He'd been trying to break Daniel for weeks, and now, without warning, Daniel was doing it himself. Judge Holt sighed. Very well. Proceed carefully, Mr. Reeves. Daniel took a breath. His voice trembled but carried an edge of determination. That night, I didn't mean for any of it to happen. I swear to God I didn't. I just wanted to talk to Emily. I told her to meet me at the old rail yard because I thought it would be private. I just wanted to say I was sorry. He looked down at his cuffed hands. When she got there, she was nervous. She kept saying she was done being afraid. She said she'd already written something just in case. That letter. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Daniel looked up, his eyes red. We argued. Not about us, about someone else. A friend of mine. Tyler. He wasn't supposed to be there. The name hit like a spark in dry grass. Everyone in the courtroom remembered him. A 22-year-old drifter who'd been questioned early in the investigation but released for lack of evidence. Fallon, the prosecutor, leaned forward. Are you saying Tyler Grant was present at the scene of the crime? Daniel hesitated. His lawyer whispered urgently, Don't say another word, Daniel. But Daniel shook him off. He was there before Emily showed up. I didn't even know until I saw his truck by the trees. I thought he was just hanging out, but when I turned around, he was standing behind her, holding my dad's old revolver. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. The judge slammed her gavel. Order, order. Fallon stood. Mr. Reeves, are you confessing that another individual was responsible for the shooting? Daniel's voice broke. I tried to stop him. I swear I did. He said she'd been talking to the cops about something about him dealing drugs. I didn't know any of it. He panicked. Daniel's voice trembled. When the gun went off, she fell. Tyler ran, and I froze. I just held her. He paused, his face twisting with grief. She was still breathing when I called 911. But by the time they got there, she was gone. The courtroom fell completely silent. For the first time since the trial began, Fallon, the unshakable prosecutor, looked uncertain. His case had always been airtight. Motive, opportunity, weapon, and history of domestic arguments. But this was different. Judge Holt frowned. Mr. Fallon, was the name Tyler Grant ever entered into the record? Fallon flipped through his binder. Yes, Your Honor. But Grant had an alibi that night. He was at a friend's house. Daniel's voice hardened. Check again. He leaned forward, eyes burning. That friend? He was me. I gave him that alibi because he threatened my sister if I didn't. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even Linda Carter, Emily's mother, covered her mouth in disbelief. Fallon looked pale. He turned to his paralegal, whispering rapidly. Within seconds, she was flipping through evidence binders, her face draining of color as she found something that had been overlooked. Judge Holt noticed a sudden tension. Mr. Fallon? Fallon hesitated, then said, Your Honor, it appears the firearm used in the murder was recovered from a storage unit registered under Tyler Grant's name. But the record listed evidence as inadmissible due to a chain of custody error. The room erupted again. The judge's gavel pounded. Order! Order in the court. Linda Carter's sobs echoed softly through chaos. Daniel was trembling. I didn't kill her, he said quietly. I lied to protect the wrong person. I thought I could carry it. But when her letter was read, I realized she forgave me. And I don't deserve that forgiveness if I don't tell the truth. His lawyer rubbed his temples. Your Honor, given this new revelation, we request an immediate review. But the judge interrupted him. Request noted. However, this is a sentencing hearing, not a retrial. Mr. Fallon, do you have anything to add? Fallon looked dazed, torn between duty and disbelief. Finally, he said, "Your Honor, in light of this testimony and the connection to suppressed evidence, the prosecution will not proceed with sentencing until this matter is investigated further." A hush fell over the courtroom. Daniel closed his eyes. Relief and exhaustion washed over him at once. Emily's mother, the woman who had once looked at him with nothing but hatred, was now watching him with something else in her eyes. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but recognition of the truth. And as she looked at Daniel, she whispered, barely loud enough for the microphones to catch, "She always said you weren't the monster they made you out to be." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since that night, he allowed himself to cry. 3 weeks later, the town of Maple Hollow, Ohio, was buzzing again. News vans lined the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions into cameras, trying to summarize what no one could quite understand. How could a convicted murderer's confession actually clear his own name? Inside the courthouse, the air was electric. The district attorney's office had reopened the case. Not because they wanted to, but because the evidence Daniel mentioned had forced their hand. At the center of it all was one simple piece of paper. Emily Carter's letter. A note written in her own handwriting. Soft, hopeful, and yet somehow prophetic for investigators. It was no longer just a victim's goodbye. It was a map. Detective Hannah Reed, who'd been part of the original case, sat in her unmarked car outside a small storage facility on the edge of town. The key she held was new, authorized only hours earlier by the judge herself. The number on the unit, 47C. The name on the lease, Tyler Grant. She slid the key into the lock, her hand shaking slightly. The door rattled open, revealing rows of dusty boxes, old tools, and in the far corner, a blue duffel bag. Inside the bag, a handgun, matching the caliber of the bullet recovered from Emily Carter's body. Next to it, a half-empty box of shells, a burner phone, and a stained sweatshirt. Detective Reed whispered under her breath, "Oh my God!" The gun serial number had been filed off, but beneath the scratches, faint etchings remained, enough to match it to a weapon registered to Daniel Reeves' late father. It was the same gun the prosecution had claimed Daniel used. But Daniel's fingerprints weren't the only ones on it. Underneath the grip tape, they found a second set belonging to Tyler Grant. Back in the courtroom, weeks later, the atmosphere was different. There was no jury this time. Only Judge Holt, the attorneys Daniel Reeves, and a gallery filled with restless faces waiting for answers. Fallon, the prosecutor who once demanded life in prison for Daniel, now stood with a stack of papers in hand. Evidence reports, fingerprint analyses, and new witness statements. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, after reviewing the recovered firearm and examining the forensics, we now have substantial evidence that Mr. Reeves did not fire the fatal shot." Daniel sat still, expression unreadable. Fallon continued. "Furthermore, it appears the alibi provided by Mr. Reeves on behalf of Tyler Grant was fabricated under threat. And," he glanced down, "the victim, Emily Carter, had documented concerns about Mr. Grant's involvement in local narcotics and possible police corruption." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the judge looked shaken. Linda Carter sat in the front row, clutching her husband's hand. Her eyes glistened with tears, but not from grief, from something closer to relief. Fallon continued, "We now believe Emily Carter discovered evidence that could have implicated Mr. Grant and others in a wider investigation. We also believe that her letter, written shortly before her death, was not a mere emotional statement." He lifted the paper from the table. "But a warning." Judge Holt leaned forward. "Explain." Fallon nodded. "The letter's final line, 'Don't let lies bury me twice,' may have been a coded plea. Investigators found that Emily had been keeping a digital journal on her laptop. Hidden within was an encrypted file titled Lies_Buried. Inside were screenshots of text messages between Grant and an unidentified police officer, discussing payoffs and silencing witnesses. The courtroom buzzed. Fallon raised his hand for silence. Grant was being paid to move drugs across county lines, and Emily knew. When she tried to confront him, she became a threat. Judge Holt exhaled slowly. "So you're saying the victim uncovered a drug ring involving a police officer, and that led to her death?" Fallon nodded grimly. Yes, Your Honor. The officer has since been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Linda Carter covered her mouth, whispering. She was trying to protect others even then. Fallon's voice softened. In light of this evidence, the state moves to vacate Mr. Reeves' conviction. The judge removed her glasses, staring at Daniel. I presided over many cases, she said quietly, but I've never seen one where the voice of the victim spoke louder after a death than it ever could in life. Daniel blinked back tears. The judge continued. This court hereby overturns the conviction of Daniel Reeves. All charges are dismissed pending further investigation into the parties involved in Miss Carter's death. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Linda Carter stood. Slowly, hesitantly, she walked toward Daniel. Every guard in the room tensed, but she wasn't angry. She was crying. When she reached him, she whispered through her tears, She forgave you, Danny. And now, I think I can too. Daniel's head dropped into his hands. The sound of his sobs echoed through the quiet courtroom. Outside, the world was already changing. News cameras flashed. Headlines blared. Victims' letter leads to overturn conviction. Secret files exposed corruption in Maple Hollow Police Department. But inside, all that remained was the sound of mother's tears and the letter that started it all. Folded neatly, placed back in the evidence bag, now preserved not as a statement of grief, but as proof of truth. Emily Carter's words had done what no lawyer, detective, or jury could do. She had spoken from beyond the grave, and changed the verdict herself. The morning after Daniel Reeves' release, Maple Hollow felt like a town split in two. Half believed justice had finally prevailed. The other half whispered that it was all just another cover-up. For Daniel, the world outside prison walls was colder than he remembered, not just the air, but the looks. Some people recognized him and crossed the street. Others stared too long, unsure whether to pity him or fear him. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. All he could think about was Emily. Every headline carried her name. Every news anchor recited her letter. Don't let lies bury me twice. Those words haunted him. In the DA's office, Prosecutor Fallon sat alone, staring at the stack of files on his desk. His face was drawn, his coffee untouched. He had built his reputation on the Reeves conviction, and now it was ashes. When Detective Reed walked in, he didn't even look up. She really was innocent, wasn't she? He muttered. Reed nodded. And Daniel was right about Grant. We tracked his bank records. Deposits that don't match his job. Transfers to a police union slush fund. Burner accounts linked to a suspended officer named Eric Madsen. Fallon rubbed his temples. It's bigger than I thought. She handed him another file, one labeled Carter Case, Supplementary Evidence. Inside were final pages from Emily's encrypted journal. She'd named names. Not just Tyler Grant and Officer Madsen, but 3 others, all connected to a trafficking network that stretched far beyond Maple Hollow. Fallon exhaled sharply. This could destroy the department. Reed's voice was steady. Or it could clean it. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through the old neighborhood for the first time in years. The trees were the same, but the faces were different. He passed a diner where he and Emily had their first date, now boarded up. He passed the corner where she used to wait for him after class. And then he stopped outside a small memorial by the courthouse steps. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes that simply said, Justice for Emily. We believe you. The truth lives. Among them, he saw something new, a single letter folded neatly under a white rose. He bent down and opened it. It was from Linda Carter. Daniel, I don't know if forgiveness is a choice or a process, but Emily believed in the truth, and you fought to find it. Maybe that's what she meant all along. You're free now. Don't waste it. Linda. Daniel's hands trembled as he read it. For the first time in years, he smiled, not out of happiness, but relief. Later that week, the breaking news came. Former officer arrested in Maple Hollow drug and homicide conspiracy. Tyler Grant and Officer Eric Madsen were taken into custody after a high-speed chase near Dayton. In their vehicle, police found burner phones, counterfeit IDs, and documents tying them to several unsolved murders across 3 states. The footage went viral, a surreal twist that gripped the entire nation. Everywhere, people were talking about the Carter letter case. TV networks replayed Daniel's emotional release from prison. Documentaries were already in production. But while the world moved on to the next headline, Daniel stayed behind, haunted by the past. He started volunteering at a youth center in town, teaching kids how to debate, how to speak up for themselves. He rarely talked about his time in prison, but when he did, his voice always came back to one message. Don't let anyone else tell your story before you do. One afternoon, a reporter caught up with him outside the community center. "Daniel, what's next for you?" she asked. He paused, looking past her to the sky above the courthouse dome. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I think Emily will want me to live." Back in the courthouse, Judge Holt signed the final paperwork on the case. The Reeves conviction was officially expunged. She sat back in her chair, reading the last line of the official statement aloud. This court acknowledges the power of truth, even when spoken from the grave. She whispered to herself, "And may we never ignore it again." A month later, on a quiet evening, Daniel returned to the spot where Emily's body was found, a small patch of woods now marked by a simple memorial stone. He placed a letter, the one that saved him, beside the flowers. The ink was faded, the edges worn, but the words still shone clear under the moonlight. "Don't let lies bury me twice." He whispered, I didn't. Then he stood, walked away, and disappeared into the fading light of the woods. Finally free, but forever changed. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes, it comes from the quietest, from a letter written in hope, read in pain, and remembered in truth. Emily Carter may be gone, but her voice still echoes in every courtroom where someone dares to speak the truth. Months passed. The world had moved on, but Maple Hollow hadn't. What happened inside that courtroom still echoed through the town like an old church bell that refused to stop ringing. Daniel Reeves' case became more than just a story. It became a symbol, a warning, a lesson, and a movement. It started with a documentary. A true crime journalist named Rachel Ellis produced a series called Letters from the Dead, The Emily Carter Story. It aired on national television, and within days, it went viral. Clips of Daniel's reaction when Emily's letter was read aloud, his tears, the gasps in the audience, the stunned silence in courtroom, were replayed on every major news network in America. People began to ask the same question. How did a handwritten letter do what the system couldn't? The hashtag Emily Carter letter trended for weeks. Victims of wrongful convictions began sharing their own stories. Law students debated the ethics of suppressed evidence. And families of the accused demanded transparency in every case. Even Congress took notice. A small group of lawmakers, moved by Emily's story, proposed new legislation, the Carter Act, to require mandatory review of any new evidence in cases involving violent crime before sentencing. It didn't pass right away, but it started something. And sometimes, a spark is enough. For Prosecutor Fallon, that spark came at a cost. He resigned quietly a few months after the case closed. When reporters asked him why, he simply said, "Because sometimes justice means stepping down, not standing tall." Detective Reed stayed on the force, but she became known as the cop who listened. Her investigations began focusing on cold cases and wrongful convictions. She often quoted Emily's words during interviews. Truth doesn't die just because people stop looking. The Maple Hollow Police Department underwent a complete restructuring. Grant and Madsen were convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, evidence tampering, and homicide. They will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. The same fate Daniel once faced. Irony, it seemed, had its own brand of justice. Daniel's life began to rebuild slowly. He enrolled in a local community college, studying law and criminal justice. He wanted to understand the system, not to destroy it, but to change it. Every lecture, every textbook, every courtroom visit brought back memories, but also purpose. He wasn't just learning the law. He was rewriting his place within it. At graduation, his valedictory speech silenced the crowd. I stood once in front of a judge, a jury, in a town that already believed I was guilty. But one voice, one letter, changed everything. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Truth may take its time, but it always finds its way home. The audience rose to their feet. Some were crying, some were clapping. All were changed. On the first anniversary of his release, Daniel returned to the courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker. The event was called Voices of Truth. Reporters, attorneys, victims' families, even students from across the state came to listen. He stood behind the same wooden podium where he once begged for his life. The courtroom lights felt softer this time. He unfolded a piece of paper, yellowed, creased, familiar. Emily's letter. He read the last paragraph again, his voice steady. If my truth ever reaches the light, I hope it saves more than just me. I hope it saves someone who still believes the world listens. He looked up and said, "It did, Emily. It saved me, and now it's saving others." The room was silent. Then applause filled the air, slow, heavy, and pure. Outside the courthouse, candles lined the steps. Each one had a small note attached, handwritten messages from people all over the country. For my brother, still fighting. For the truth that hasn't been heard yet. For Emily Carter. Years later, Daniel became a criminal defense investigator. He traveled from town to town, helping attorneys review old cases, ones that smelled of doubt and silence. Everywhere he went, people recognized him, not as the accused, but as the man who refused to stay quiet. He carried Emily's letter with him, folded neatly in a worn leather notebook. He said it reminded him of who he once was and who he refused to become again. A letter, just ink on paper, written by a girl who wanted to be heard. But those words reached further than she ever could. In a world where truth is buried beneath lies, sometimes the smallest voice can shake the biggest walls. Emily Carter's voice didn't fade in death. It lived on, louder than ever. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real meaning of justice.